Okay, so today we're going to go over chapter 3 from the book. This is really just the interactions of X radiation with matter. This is something that you've had in previous classes, and probably in your techniques class most of all, as well as basic, but we'll be going over the interactions just so that you have kind of a refresher on this. The book also covers a few different things like primary radiation, attenuation, absorption, all that we will go over. PKBP, this is really the penetrating power of the photons in the X-ray beam. You can control this quite a bit depending on the body thickness and what body part you happen to be X-raying. Mass, this is actually the responsibility of the X-ray tech that the patient receives the minimum amount of radiation. So this figure here is something that you typically will set. You can use AEC occasionally, but ultimately it is responsibility of the technologist. This just shows the basic layout of the tube with the anode, cathode sides, glass housing surrounding it, basically where the X-rays come out. It shouldn't look any different than what you've already seen. The anode is usually made of tungsten and metal or rhenium tungsten and metal alloy. This is just so that the consistency between images is reproducible from patient to patient. You don't have a wide range of differing techniques when you're using the same technique. You want a bunch of different densities based on the construction of the anode. Really, what comes out of the X-ray tube is going to be a mixture of, I would say, high energy radiation as well as low energy radiation. Those lower level radiations are really not useful at all. And generally, they don't even get through the glass tube if they don't have much power to them at all. But they do manage to get through that. Usually, the aluminum filtration at the end of the tube will prevent it from reaching the patient. Aluminum will basically harden the beam, so it'll remove kind of those low level, long wavelength radiation that only increases patient dose. What's left coming out of the beam is called your primary radiation. Attenuation is just reduction in the number of primary photons in the X-ray beam through absorption, which is just a total loss of radiation energy, and scatter, which you know is just a change in direction of travel. It may also involve a partial loss of energy. As the beam travels or passes through the object in its path. So there's a lot of different things that can happen when the radiation comes out of the tube. And some of it can be attenuation, some of it can be scattered away. Some will just pass through and create your image. Your IR and radiographic film are the same thing. They are used interchangeably, but with film nowadays, we don't so much see that. But for the test purposes, you may have references back to it. So we have basically 5 types of interactions. We have coherent scattering, Compton, photoelectric absorption, pair production, and photodisintegration. Only Compton and photoelectric are important for diagnostic radiology. Generally, coherent is on the low end that doesn't have enough, I would say, movement to move electrons out of their orbit. Pair production, photodisintegration, those get more into therapy. Those are higher than the diagnostic levels. So we're looking into killing cells generally with those two things. Compton scattering, responsible for most of the scattered radiation produced during the exposures. Incoming X-ray photon interacts with a loosely bound outer shell electron on an atom of an irradiated object. On encountering the electron, the incoming X-ray photon surrenders a portion of its kinetic energy to dislodge the electron from its outer shell orbit. The ejected electron is called a Compton electron or secondary electron. So as we go to our little diagram here, you've seen this. This is pretty basic coming in. You have an incoming X-ray photon. It's going to generally go towards one of these outer shells. It's going to go towards the outgoing photon, so it will change directions and it will give you a little outgoing electron on there. Photoelectric effect. This is just an incoming X-ray dislodges an inner shell, typically the K shell electron, and ionizes the atom. Totally absorbed by the atom. The electron removed from its orbit is called a photoelectron and escapes with kinetic energy equal to the difference between the energy of the incoming X-ray and the binding energy of the electron. So basically what holds it in place, it has enough force to kind of move that out of the way. Vacancy is created, which an outer shell electron fills. So when we're looking at this in our basic diagnostic range from 23 to 150, what happens is the X-ray photon will come in, it will knock out the electron out of its orbit, typically in the K shell. What will happen when it is ejected is that this now becomes unstable on the inside. So what happens is with one of the outer shells, the energy is higher to pull this electron into this orbit now, and that will continue until the whole thing is rebalanced. So this is basic um, description of what the photoelectric effect is. Density, degree of blackening, bones either is typically going to have a higher atomic number, which absorbs more radiation, appears white on film as opposed to lungs or soft tissue. So as we're making these interactions and going through the bones, obviously if there's something in the way that has a higher atomic number, the X radiation is not going to pass directly through it as it would easily pass through something like air, because there's nothing basically stopping them with a low atomic number of the soft tissue of the lungs. Primary radiation is direct radiation. This is radiation that moves or emerges directly from the tube collimator and moves without deflection towards a wall, door, viewing window, and so on. So basically, the primary radiation is what's exiting the X-ray tube. Exit or image forming radiation. All the X-ray photons that reach their destination, which is the IR, after passing through the object being radiographed. So exit or image forming, that's what passes through the from the tube, past the patient, and then makes it to the IR. And that can only be your exit or image forming radiation. If it doesn't reach the IR, it's neither one of those. Scattered radiation, this is, as you know, typically from the patient, but you can get small scatter radiation from just the beam hitting the window, deflecting off of other, let's say, traveling radiation going through. Typically what will happen is with the patient being the largest source of scatter, you'll get all this radiation coming through and it'll bounce in different directions based on whether it's hitting bone. Sometimes it'll pass through, sometimes the energy isn't quite enough to kind of get through it, and then you'll have absorption of the patient, and that's typically just going to be an extra dose to the patient. Mammography and diagnostics. This is your typical range, 23 to 150. Usually you only see 150 up towards like the chest x-rays on bigger patients. After that level, typically the scatter is just too much and it's going to gray everything out, and you're not going to get diagnostic quality images. 23 is typically going to be down towards the mammography range. They use some doses that light, but typically I think it's in the 30 to 40 range. Contrast media. The reason contrast media shows up is a higher atomic number. This increases the chances for photoelectric interactions when compared with structures without contrast media. So this also will increase the dose because of the high atomic number it takes to basically go through that, and some of it will be absorbed, similar to the high atomic number that bone has. So the bone will typically absorb more radiation than the soft tissue structures. Coherent scattering, just to mention, it's a low level of energy. This won't eject any electrons from the atom. So with the electrons kind of going around in circles, what will happen is with the coherent scattering is that the X-ray will come in, it'll have a little bit of kind of vibrations that it'll sense, but it will not have enough energy to kind of move it away from its orbit. This is not really that important because it's at the level that's lower than the kVp for diagnostic radiology. Typically just shows you the coherent. So as the beam comes in, it'll kind of pass through. This will get a little bit excited, but it will not be enough to kind of move it out of its orbit. Pair production, this is used in PET scanning. This is really above the level of diagnostic use. Photodisintegration, this is used mainly in radiation therapy applications where they go over like the nucleus of the cell and try to target that cell, because without the nucleus, the cell will die. So the same thing with cancer cells within the body. If they target those specific nuclei of those cells and kill those off, what you should see is the loss of cell function, and the cancer cells won't be able to reproduce themselves. This has been basically just kind of an overview of Chapter 3. We definitely want you to read through these chapters, even though we kind of go through them on these voice overlays. If you have questions, feel free to email me. If you're not getting the basic idea of the interactions with matter, then definitely we need to get this cleared up before the ARRT exam.